Hey, my name's Emily. My life's kind of been one for the books, and by that I mean it's like ripping off a band-aid. Quick, kind of painful, and mostly forgettable. If you've got a minute or two, pull up a chair. I've got a saga that'll make you thankful for your crazy relatives. Let's start with my so-called family picture. A quaint little house with a white picket fence, a backyard, BB Hughes, and a family dog named Buster who's missing a few patches of fur. That's where the Norman Rockwell painting ends. Inside that picture-perfect home was my big sister, Rachel, basically the queen bee. Then there's me. I guess I was like the worker bee, just buzzing around, doing my thing. Barely noticed. I've got to hand it to Rachel. She knew how to play the game. Blonde, a smile that could light up a dim room, and a way with words that made our folks melt like a popsicle in July. She snagged everything growing up, a shiny bike, the last slice of pizza, and even the big fuzzy sweater I was eyeing for Christmas. You guessed it, Rachel's. And when she turned on the charm, it was game over. Mom, Dad, can I please get that dress for prom? She'd bat her eyes, and they fell for it every time. Me, though, I got the leftovers and the hand-me-downs. But don't get me wrong, I wasn't exactly Oliver Twist or anything. I got clothes on my back, a roof over my head, but let's just say life wasn't handing me any silver spoons. Now, my folks, Dad worked the kind of job where he came home with grease under his nails and a tired smile. Mom, she was a wizard with a spatula and a knack for sniffing out BS, unless it came from Rachel. When Rachel got into that fancy-pants college with the big lawns and the ivy-covered walls, it was like Christmas came early and stayed late. Mom and Dad threw a party that could wake the dead, but by the time I was ready to start thinking about my own future, the parade had long passed. Suddenly, it was all money's tight, Emily, and real life's about making sacrifices, you know. I remember them breaking the news, sitting at the kitchen table that had a wobbly leg. Dad was scratching the back of his neck, a sure sign he wasn't keen on the conversation. Emily, we've been crunching the numbers, and it's just not looking good. You've got to be realistic, he said. Mom piped in, stirring her coffee even though it didn't need any. College ain't cheap. Maybe it's time you think about getting a job. You know, help out a bit. The way they danced around it, you'd think they were telling me Buster ran off to join the circus rather than just saying straight that my dreams were too expensive. So, there I was, not even 22 and slapped with the reality that school was a no-go. I wasn't about to roll over and let dreams die, though. My plan was as plain as it could be. Work my fingers to the bone, save every penny, and get myself into that courtroom someday with Esquire at the end of my name. The jobs I had weren't glamorous by any stretch. By day, I was slinging coffee and dodging pastry crumbs. By night, I was up to my elbows in suds, washing dishes at a diner that had seen better days. You've got to be the hardest working person I know, Emily, my friend Sarah said one night in our dingy little kitchen. She was a freelance graphic designer with a laugh that could light up the whole block. Yeah, agreed. Trish chimed in, who was stringing her bass guitar, getting ready for a gig with her band. If there's anyone who can pull this off, it's you. Their words were like a pat on the back, a cheer from the sidelines that kept my feet moving. Everything was on track, maybe a bit behind schedule, but what's life without a few delays, right? Then, just like that, it all came crashing down. I woke up one morning with what I thought was a killer flu. Turns out, it was way more serious. Long story short, I landed in the hospital with a stack of medical bills that looked like the Encyclopedia Britannica. Miss Emily, your insurance covered some of it, but you still owe quite a bit, the lady at the billing department said, her voice sounding like she was always about to deliver bad news. And she did, big time. There went my college fund, swallowed up by numbers and decimal points I could barely comprehend. I tried to plead my case, get a payment plan or something. Look, I got nothing. I told her every part of me wanting to crawl into a hole and give up. It's not personal, hon, it's just the system, she replied, but it sure felt personal to me. Back at our apartment, the atmosphere was as stale as the pizza we left out overnight. There go the textbooks, I muttered, flipping through the pages of legal definitions I still hadn't memorized. We sat there, 3 dreams deferred, wrapped up in the brutal honesty of our cramped living space. What next? Trish asked after a silence that overstayed its welcome. I didn't have an answer, just a bunch of question marks dancing around my head. I was back to square one, but somehow, it felt like I was even further behind than when I started. Start over, I finally said. What else can I do? I'm not cut out for giving up. It sounded good, but even I heard the quiver in my voice. Both of them nodded, but there was no hiding the worry lines etched deep into the moment. Yeah, I understand. Our house is too crowded, I whispered into the phone, the words bitter as they left my mouth. Mom didn't see me swallow the lump in my throat or the way my hand shook. You're tough, Emily. You'll figure it out, Dad offered up before he handed the phone back to Mom. The bus stop bench was hard against my back. I sat there, figuring out my next move while people with places to be rushed past me. Rachel, with her new baby and her picture-perfect life, didn't even come to the phone. Probably didn't want to catch my bad luck through the receiver. Family right. The guy waiting next to me snorted, catching the tail end of my phone call. He was wearing a jacket that had seen better winters and a 5 o'clock shadow sitting at 8 o'clock. Yeah, family, I echoed, not really in the mood to chat. But there was a solace in talking to a stranger. Hey, don't let it beat you. You look like you've got fight in you, he said, crinkling the paper bag in his hand. I managed a half smile. Got any tips for sleeping on one of these seats? I joked, but the humor didn't quite reach my eyes. He looked over, squinting as if he was sizing up the bench. This is a 24-hour ride. Go all the way to the end. Safer than a bench, his words hung in the air as my phone buzzed with a low battery warning. Great, add that to the list of today's hits. The bus hissed as it came to a stop in front of us, its doors yawning open, inviting us to go wherever it might take us. The guy got on the bus, finding a seat among the tired faces of the nighttime commuters. I stayed back, bus fare tight in my fist, not ready to commit to just riding around in circles yet. I pulled my suitcase and started walking, the wheels drumming a lonely beat on the sidewalk. The streetlights flickered overhead, and in their stuttering light, I made a silent vow. This isn't how my story ends. Holding on to that thought, I walked through the night. Every step was a defiance, every breath a promise that I would claw my way out of this hole. Come on over, kid. Aunt Marlene's raspy voice came through the other end, like it was pulling me out of quicksand. I never thought I'd be so happy to hear that tone of hers. When I got to her place, she didn't waste time on pleasantries or useless small talk. You look like hell, was her greeting as she ushered me in, her hand firm on my back. I spent the first few days in her guest room, trying to piece myself back together. She didn't press me for details. She wasn't the type for cozy heart-to-hearts, but I could tell she was waiting for me to start talking. Finally, as we sat at her cluttered kitchen table, flanked by plants that seemed as tough as she was, Aunt Marlene sat down her mug and looked at me with those pure, piercing eyes. What do you want, Emily? Really want? It made me nervous, like I was on one of those makeover shows and this was the big reveal, but I was too tired to beat around the bush. I want to be a lawyer, Aunt Marlene, I said, my voice carrying an edge of desperation I could no longer hide. She nodded as if she already knew it. If that's the case, she started, tapping her fingers on the table, the clinking sound mingling with the tick-tock of the wall clock. I'll pay for your education. My heart jolted like it got hit by a punch of hope. You serious? I couldn't help the grin that broke through. As a heart attack, she replied, raising her finger and slicing the air with her condition. You keep your grades up, no slacking. Her words were stern, yet there was a spark in her eyes telling me she believed in me. Really? I couldn't scrim the excitement. Really, she said. But none of that mushy stuff. She grumbled as I stood up and hugged her, the words thank you getting crushed between us. She patted my back before shooing me off. And you're going to work for me, part-time. I need more help around here than I care to admit. What kind of work? I was eager, ready to do just about anything. "The kind that needs doing," she replied vaguely, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We'll start with that jungle you call a yard and move on to the yard work tomorrow." I laughed, a hearty, genuine sound I hadn't heard from myself in a while. "Deal." "Don't think I'm just being nice, Emily," Aunt Marlene warned. "You fall off, get lazy, and the deal's off." I shook my head, the seriousness settling back in. "Won't happen." She eyed me for a long moment, then smiled. "Good. Now help me with these damn plants. They've got a better social life than I do." I spent the rest of the day covered in soil, pruning and watering, but the dirt never felt so good on my hands. Aunt Marlene made me work for every penny she was offering, but that was okay. The college days weren't a walk in the park, and she had hooked me up big time. But the balance between the books and bills was like juggling knives. Drop one, and it could cut deep. I'd blink open in the mornings after cramming civil procedure, my alarm buzzing like a bee in a jar, books spread across the desk like a buffet I didn't want to dig into when my stomach grumbled, reminding me I was a human who needed fuel. I'd make a run to the nearest food joint on campus. Make it a double, long night ahead. I'd tell Lily, who manned the counter, and she'd pass over the coffee and sandwich. "You're going to burn out if you keep it like this," Lily would warn. "Can't burn out when you're on fire," I'd quip, even though I felt more like kindling than a blaze. Nights turned into a blur of flashcards and frayed nerves. Whenever my phone buzzed, it was either a reminder for an unpaid bill or a message from Aunt Marlene asking how my day went. I always told her better than it actually was. Then things changed overnight. Aunt Marlene got real sick, life taking her. I squeezed her hand more times than I could count in that too-quiet hospital room. I couldn't say much. What do you say when the person who's your rock is crumbling so? Who's going to yell at me for eating cookies in bed when you're gone? I tried to joke in one of those visits, struggling to keep it light. "You better not," she rasped, her voice a whisper. Crumbs everywhere. We never talked about the money. It was like a silent agreement, the elephant in the room wearing a tutu nobody wanted to comment on. After she passed, I sat in that stiff lawyer's office, more nervous than I ever was for any exam. The lawyer, a stiff man with a comb-over and glasses lighting down his nose, said, "She's left you the house, Emily." It was like Aunt Marlene was still looking out for me. "She what?" I blinked, gears in my head grinding to a halt. "The house." He fiddled with papers. "A considerable amount for your student debts. The rest, well, it's for you to figure out." Marlene was clear about making your own way. Despite the knot in my throat, I asked, "Did she say anything else?" He adjusted his glasses. "That she believed in you," he continued, "and that she'd haunt you if you gave up." I laughed through the tears. That was Aunt Marlene, all right. Leaving the office that day, I felt heavier and lighter at the same time. She had given me a legacy not just in bricks and mortar, but in the belief that I could finish this last lap without her. I was neck-deep in prep for the next bar exam when I heard the knock, 3 sharp raps, the kind that tell you this ain't going to be a friendly, "How do you do?" Pushing open the front door of Aunt Marlene's, my house. There they stood, Mom, Dad, Rachel, and her husband, Dave, like some grim reunion. Rachel wasted no time. "Emily, look at us all together again in this huge place like a twisted sitcom, ain't it?" she drawled, leaning against the doorframe. Dad started in that tone, the kind that said, "Sit down. Shut up. We've decided, we've been talking." This house should be for Rachel. She's got kids, a family, he said. Incredulity played on my face. "No kidding." I shot back, sarcasm heavy as an anchor. Mom's lips tightened, a sure sign she was ramping up to a guilt trip. "You'll understand when you have your own family. This is just practical," she said. I must have missed the part where practical meant kicking me out of my own home. "Wrong house for that chat," I snapped, crossing my arms. Rachel chimed in, batting her eyelashes at me and eyeing Dave for support, who just shrugged. "See, this house is wasted on you." We could give it life, laughter, children running around. And what? Turn on Marlene's parlor into a romper room. The idea felt like acid on my tongue. There's no need to be rude, Dave mumbled, finally finding words. Right, because showing up to claim my house is peak civility. I snapped. My laughter was bitter. Selfish after years of keeping her in your thoughts during birthday cards. Convenient memory you got there. They shuffled, uneasy. This ain't how they imagined their gold digging would go. Rachel broke it predictably. You can be such a... She trailed off. Don't, I warned. Just leave, all of you. As they filed out the same door they came in, burdened by their disbelief and entitlement, Dad turned to me. You'll regret this. I stood tall, looking him square in the eye. The only thing I'll regret is not changing the lock sooner. The door shut behind them, and the silence was mine again. This unwelcome throwback was closed. Inheritance or not, I was keeping Aunt Marlene's legacy, not auctioning it off to the highest bidder in my bloodline. I was beat, the kind of tired that sticks to your bones. Pulling into the driveway after a double shift at the law firm could do that to a person. All I wanted was a hot shower in my bed. As I jammed my key into the lock, it just ground against metal. What the? I muttered, fiddling with the key. That's when the door swung open. Rachel stood there, little Maya on her hip and a cocky tilt to her lips. Change the locks, Emily. Surprise. My eyebrows shot up like hell. Watch me. I shot back, already dialing. Dad's truck pulled into the driveway just as I hung up. Him and Mom got out, tag-teaming like this was some sort of intervention. Emily, be reasonable. Mom started, her eyes moist as if she were in a soap opera. I'm past reasonable, I said, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. Dave stepped up to me, a good foot taller, trying to look menacing. Come on, Emily. Don't make a scene, he said, voice low. I held up my phone with the recording button clearly on. Say that again, Dave, for the camera. I insisted. His face turned the color of sour milk. Sirens cut through the heavy air as a cop car pulled into view. The officer stepped out, stirring looks in business. What seems to be the problem here? He asked. Their bravado crumbled like stale bread. Dad's voice lost a few decibels. It's a misunderstanding, officers. Family matter, he said, trying to salvage the situation. I'd say it's a bit more than a family matter, I said, crossing my arms. The officers looked between us, taking in the scene. They were good at this, shifting gears as the situation unfolded. All right, let's start with some ID, and we'll go from there, one of them said, pulling out a notepad. Reluctantly, Rachel handed Maya to Mom and dug into her purse. The legal tango had begun. They asked questions, we gave answers. Dad and Mom put on a show, but the deed to the house was in my name, signed and sealed by Aunt Marlene's will. Can you prove you live here, ma'am? The officer asked me. Better, I can prove I own it, I said, reaching for my briefcase in the car. The sight of Aunt Marlene's will felt like the first deep breath I'd taken since stepping out of that damn car. The officers read it, their eyebrows lifting and dipping as they took in the legalese. Seems clear to us, the officer said, folding the papers back into the briefcase. I suggest you hand over a set of keys to Miss here, otherwise we will have to proceed with charges for breaking and entering and unlawful eviction. Rachel gave up a set of keys, and Mom and Dad hushed up quick. Dave, well, he looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. The cops escorted them off the property, and Mom shot me a look like I kicked her kitten, but the law was the law, no room for sob stories. The door closed behind me with a click, like the final word in an argument. I leaned against it, the rush of adrenaline making my hands shake. Exhausted, I sludged into the kitchen to make a much-needed cup of coffee. As the kettle boiled, I thought about what my next move should be. The hefty click of the final lock snapping into place felt like the end of a long bad joke. My house, now a fortress, I muttered to nobody in particular. Maybe I'll get a big, nasty dog. I wasn't much of a pet person, but the thought of some drooling monster that could scare off any would-be family intrusions brought a smirk to my face. Weeks stripped by in the silence. From my family's end, it was louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. No calls, not even a lousy text. Sometimes, deep in the night, when the work was done and the quiet was too much, I'd find myself on Rachel's social media page. She had a knack for the dramatic. Photos of the kids, all sad eyes and pouty lips, captions snipping at my conscience. Little Tim sure wishes he had a yard to play in, or Maya's third birthday without Auntie Emily. Does she think I had amnesia, that I'd forget why I stood my ground and take pity? I remember the days when I begged for money to pay for my studies, and all I got were fancy speeches about responsibility and tough love. I can still feel the cold slamming of the door when I was broke and hurting, and they told me they had no room. The way my own bedrock, my foundation, crumbled to dust beneath me. Nah, my new life was my making, my dues paid in full, my battles fought with no one in my corner. No amount of puppy-eyed pictures would change the history they wished I'd forget. I thought about posting a reply once, something snappy and a bit mean, but why bother? I had work to catch up on, a stack of files on my table that didn't give a damn about family feuds. I had clients who depended on me, and that was the reality I chose to engage with. Sometimes, late into the evening, I'd pour myself a bourbon, head out to the backyard they wanted to take from me, and savor the quiet. I'd think about that guard dog again, a big one with a bark that would make my folks think twice before stepping onto the porch. Maybe a Rottweiler or a Mastiff, something with bite. My phone stayed quiet, a dead limb I've long since learned to function without. And when I'd finally hit the sack, I'd sleep the sleep of the just or the wicked. I didn't care which. No ghosts of guilt to disturb my rest, no restless wondering about what-ifs. Just the peace of knowing that from the four walls around me to the roof over my head, it was all mine through and through. The last thing I remember every night was the faint idea of getting that dog. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't, but the choice was mine, and that was good enough for me.